Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to our webinar series with the Center of Excellence in Human Development. Yeah, we're having our discussion under this theme of doing science better and statistical literacy for non-statistical researchers. And we started last week, Wednesday, and I'd like to apologize for those who were there last week, Wednesday. We couldn't continue we started on Tuesday, we couldn't continue on Wednesday and Thursday. But we are continuing today and tomorrow for the remainder of the webinars in our series. Please just indicate to me that you can hear me so that I can continue. All right, great. Thank you so much. All right, just to remind you of the objectives of these webinars, and they're just to raise awareness about the need for robustness in observational studies. And also importantly, I think the emphasis that I've been trying to make in the past webinar, and the emphasis that I'm going to be making in today's webinar and tomorrow's webinar is just the way of thinking about research and really trying to understand whether, if we've got a better understanding of the theoretical underpinnings of statistical modeling, which we're going to touch briefly tomorrow, does that help us to better interpret the results from our studies? But we know that, as I said on Tuesday last week, that is not where we start. We start with the planning as well as the execution of the study, which is really what we're going to be talking about today, specifically focusing on data management planning. And really what we hope to get out of these webinars is this mindful approach towards statistical analysis, but not only statistical analysis, a mindful approach towards project planning, towards the management of the data, such that we're able to apply best practices in data management, and also to discuss some toolkits for researchers in quantitative research. And once again, I just want to remind you that the aim is not, the aim is not to teach statistical methods, but to cultivate a way about statistical thinking, which involves also collection and the management of data. And so it's not a practical workshop or on statistical analysis, red cap, or statistical packages, but we will touch briefly on all of those during this presentation. And we just seek to introduce important concepts for researchers and that we need to consider for quantitative research. And we will support that by practical demonstrations. And just to recap, in terms of what we discussed last week, we introduced this concept of an epistemic revolution and pedagogical transformation for research, particularly for quantitative research. And this is informed by this gap that is existing in the skills, and which leads to the challenges that we highlighted, such as inadequate planning, misapplication of methods, poor reproducibility, and lack of transparency. And therefore, that requires us to improve the skills of researchers in order to try and cover these gaps. We also spoke about this gap in terms of between the available skills and the demands in outputs, and how that contributes to poor quality research, because we do not have enough skills to meet the rising gap, the continuing rise of the demand for us to publish, and that leads to an increase in gap as well, because the skills that we have are not keeping up with the demand of publishing. All right, and we also discuss this concept of really emphasizing on detailed description of the studies, and using this quotation that an ideal study is one where all potential outcomes are explored prior to data collection. So the emphasis here is that really all of this thinking needs to occur prior to the project starting, that is prior to data collection. And one of the examples that I'm going to be looking at today, which is one of the projects that I've worked on, I'm going to be discussing that in terms of how, it was helpful to discuss at the earlier stage the process, statistical analysis plans, and how it assisted us in going forward. And really, the emphasis was last week was how we should describe our research methods in our proposals in details, and introducing the concepts of the strobe checklist, which we require to assist us in planning of research projects. So now we're on the second installment of our webinar, and we're discussing, really the gaps in data management, and to understand what those gaps are and why they're important, and to try and to contextualize our talk. I've quoted a number of studies, 3 studies that have looked into this concept of research data management among researchers. The first study is one by Unal and colleagues in Poland, which looked at research data management and data sharing behavior of university researchers. And this was published in a conference proceedings. And they surveyed about 1,100 academics from different countries in 2016 and 2017. And some of their findings are interesting. So 75% of researchers that were surveyed in their study were uncertain if the institution had a data management plan, and only 15% had data management plan for their current research. 13% used data management plan for their past research. So as you can see, there's a really low intake in terms of application of data management plans in studies, in quantitative studies, and 29% believe that a data management plan helps manage data. And so that really speaks to whether the attitudes of the researchers, because if we do not have positive attitudes towards these tools, that speaks to whether we will be willing to implement them or not to implement them in our studies. So if less than 50% of the researchers in this particular context thought that a data management plan would help in the management of their data, that signifies that's a red flag. It signifies a problem, because those the 30% or rather the 70% are probably unlikely to want to implement that in their own study, and 55% were uncertain or not familiar with the concept of metadata. And so this highlighted training gaps. 81% had no formal training in research data management, but there was some interest in receiving training in terms of aspects of data management, such as 56% who were interested in receiving training for a data management plan, 50% who were interested in getting training on metadata, version control, consistent file naming, data citation styles. And really the take home from this study for me is that there's an underwhelming interest from researchers for formal training. I mean, if 50% of researchers in that particular setting, and we don't know what the figures would be, what the figures are in our setting. I didn't come across a study. Maybe there is a study that has looked at that. But if 50%, if you take this as representing researchers in other areas as well, 50% of researchers, interested in training is not a really good number, because then, that really means that researchers are not really interested in implementing these tools or these systems in their projects. And the reasons for that vary. And really, we need to try as researchers to try and find better ways of improving, better ways of managing our data. Another local, this one is a local study, and the colleagues at West and University of Pretoria, they looked at hidden concerns of sharing data, by low middle income country scientists, and this was published in Global Bioethics in 2018, and they surveyed life scientists who were part of this network, the NEPED SendBio network. There were about 100 scientists that were surveyed, including from South Africa, from different countries, and you can see the list of countries there, and the different levels of in terms of the occupations where the different academics were in their different in their respective ranks. And something that is interesting to me, and a result when they were asked to rate, these are just some of the results from this particular study, and they were asked to rate these statements, and I've highlighted two statements here which highlight a gap, at least back in 2018, in terms of what these researchers believed to be a gap in terms of the tools that were at their disposal for managing data. And about, if you combine this, so one is strongly disagree, and 5 is strongly agree, 4 being agree. So if you look at 4 and 5, which is agree and strongly agree, all right, about this is about 61% of these researchers said that they lack up-to-date hardware for managing their data. And about 58% said that they lack up-to-date software for managing their data. Fortunately, with institutions such as Wits University and UCT, Stellenbosch, I'm aware, and University of the Western Cape, where I am, there has been a drive towards improving access to this software. I spoke about RedCap, which is a really versatile program for data storage and managing data, and also assisting researchers to capture data and to collect data electronically in real time. In the unit where I worked at Wits University, which is the Developmental Pathways for Health Research Unit, where I manage data, about 5 years ago, so that's about, no, not even 5 years ago, so about 8 years ago, from about maybe 2018, from 2017 to 2018, we moved away from paper data collection, and we tried to move to a real-time electronic data collection using tools like using a tool like RedCap, and that has really helped in terms of firstly data security, as well as ensuring that there's good quality in the data that we collected. But obviously there are still gaps, because this is a process that we started. As we're starting this process, there were still gaps, and I'm going to be sharing some of those gaps with you to help you in terms of your thinking when you're planning your own studies. All right. And so, and this is driven, so some of the common responses from researchers when, in their applications, when they're asked about how they're going to be managing the data. This is one of the common ones that I've come across in ethics applications. And really the researcher will say that the data set will be stored in an encrypted password computer, and the files will be accessed only by those involved in the study. So many researchers are still using a file-based system in terms of storing their data. So when I'm talking file-based, I'm talking about whether you're talking about your Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel. In one of the studies that we that I was involved in, which is the Birth to 30 study at West University. I mean, we had many, many years of data which were collected in both Microsoft Access and Excel files. And in the period that I mentioned, around 2016 to 2018, in fact, it was, I think, after 2018, we undertook a process of trying to merge all of that data into a database that will, that will be secure, because files get lost, files get corrupted. In fact, that was one of the major challenges that we experienced when we were doing this exercise, in that a number of files were corrupted, which meant that we lost that data unless we were, we were willing to go back to the hard copy files and to recapture that data. That data was completely lost. So, it's a huge, this highlights one of the reasons why having a secure system like RedCap is extremely important. And there are levels, there are layers of protection through RedCap, both at an institutional level as well as in terms of the development of the application itself. It is constantly being updated at Vanderbilt University, but also at institutions like VETS as well as UWC. There's strong support, IT support for the systems like RedCap, which and those individuals regularly update the security features of the program and ensure that they're up to date with with the security features that are being updated by the developers. But also at an individual level, as a researcher, it allows you, firstly, it's in the cloud. So, even if you lose your own personal computer, there is no loss of the data, because the data are in the cloud. But importantly, if you have your device, your device hopefully is password protected, and it is not an easy password, but also RedCap itself uses an encrypted password. Not only that, people who have got access, there are different levels of access to data and what individuals are able to do within RedCap. And I'm going to show you an example of that. So some individuals can only have rights to view data. Some individuals can have rights to edit and export data. But also importantly, in terms of protection of personal information, you can highlight variables which are identifier variables, and such that when you are exporting the data, individuals who do not have the rights or the rights to download or to export personal information of the patients or of the participants, they will not be able to do so. So there are different layers of protection. So, file-based data management should be a thing of the past. As researchers, we should completely move away from file-based data management. And that also goes to how we manage versions of our data. We still have a challenge in that we manage versions of our data at a file level, and those files are only based in our systems, or rather in our computers, in our hard drives, and they're not based in the cloud. One of the things that I tried to introduce when I was there at VETS at DPHRU is that such management of versions of data, for example, should be performed in systems like your OneDrive, which is managed by the university, and that system allows you to assess the different versions of your data. And obviously, you are able to share the folder where the data are kept with other researchers. And so that's extremely important. And I had an experience while I spent some time, 3 months in Cambridge in the UK. We were not while we were working there, we were not allowed to keep data in our personal computers. All the data had to be in the university server, and we had to analyze data in the university server because the challenges, as I said earlier, you can lose your device. Your device can be hacked, and and the data can be corrupted. You can have a virus, and all sorts of nasty stuff can happen to the data, and a data breach can happen. This was a qualitative study of researchers in Nigeria. And this is just a quotation from one of the responses of the researchers. These were researchers in the Department of Chemistry. And data loss is really a thing. And you don't know when you may experience it. Most of us, or let me rather say many of us, are not necessarily versed with computer hardware, managing computers. And so when we experience these challenges, it becomes a huge problem. And to try and access support through various institutional support mechanisms, it may take time, and that may lead to long delays. And there are individuals who completely lost their data and they had to start afresh. This individual, as they highlight, they were forced to go back, if you look at the last sentence, and repeat the experiment for the latter part of the work. So the loss of data is a huge threat. And as I mentioned, the breach of data as well, in terms of viruses, people accessing your data, is also a huge problem. All right. So what are the tools that we need to have? Is the statistical analysis plan, which, as I mentioned, is a document that needs to be developed upfront before you even start your data collection, the codebook, data management plan, and analytical scripts. And these supporting tools for these are standard operating procedures within the departments. We've got a tool like RedCap, and we've got statistical packages such as R, Stata, and SPSS. Personally, and this is just a personal preference, I love managing my data in R. I find it has useful packages that can help me to manipulate my data, to make changes in my data with ease. And I'm sure others may prefer different packages, Stata, SPSS, and so on. So what are the important elements of these different tools that we have, such as your statistical analysis plan, your codebook, your data management plan, and analysis scripts? All right. For a statistical analysis plan, as I mentioned last week, you need the details about the project, such as your title, your brief background and rationale, and your research objectives, dummy tables, and analytical objectives. All right. Importantly as well, you need to specify how sample size was determined, as well as data management plan is a part, it's an element of a statistical plan as well, but we'll describe a data management plan as well separately. The variables and methods table, as well as the statistical framework that will be applied in your analysis, so that you think about this before you even touch your data. All right, it is a process that happens before data collection. And in your codebook, you need to specify the variable labels, the variable names, the units of measurements or codes and code labels. You need to specify the recording format, such as, for example, this is important for days, for example. I will show you an example where, if you've got days in different formats, you will fail to calculate. If you're trying to work out age, for example, and you've got days which are captured in different formats, you may struggle to work out the work out age. I had this challenge in one of the studies that I was managing, and I mean, people from different countries, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's North America, that have got a format where they have got month, day, and year. So it's a slightly different format. So if you looking at values which are less than 12, it may be confusing to identify which is a month and which is the day. All right. So this should be standardized across, if you're collecting across different sites, this should be standardized across sites. If there are any formulae that are used to compute variables, and these must be mentioned, as well as the source of the variables, the different questionnaires or instruments that will be, that will be the source of those variables, as well as when those measurements will be taken, will be taken, if it's a longitudinal project, at which time points will particular data be collected. And also, I mean, is this a required field? You need to specify branching logics as well, whether a branching logic tells you if, it's really, it specifies, when, who should respond to a particular question. If you responded, for example, a yes to one question, then you are required to respond to a follow-up question. That's a branching logic, all right? And that can be, those are elements that can be implemented in RedCap. All right. And also, importantly, validations and data queries. Validations ensure that you generate flags when you capture data which are outside of the specified minimum and maximum for that particular variable. So those are important elements that you need to consider. So part of the process that we used to engage in, or I used to engage in when I was the data manager at DPHRU, was to sit with the researchers and to go through every variable in the questionnaire or in the data collection pack. All right, it may be various instruments, and this may take an hour, it may take several hours, but it is depending on the complexity of the project, and it may be something that you may it was an iterative process where we meet with the researchers, we identify these, obviously, as the researcher knows the minimum and maximum values that are expected for for any particular variable. Some variables are easy. For example, such as the one that we looked at earlier in terms of the rating from 1 up to 5, and that can be easily implemented on RedCap such that there is no room for mistake. But in some cases, for example, if you're importing data and that were captured elsewhere, you need to make sure you need to have implemented within your project these rules that will assist you to identify variables where they are capturing errors. For example, if somebody elsewhere captured a 6 instead of values between 1 and 5, then that should create a flag so that you're able to go back to the individuals and make and request those data to be corrected. So the process, as I was saying, is that we used to sit, and this is a process that you may engage in with individual. I mean, I know that not all departments will have a luxury of a data management person. But there were, I mean, I interacted with some departments at Wits University, for example, where they would designate an individual who would be their go-to person in terms of data management, RedCap, and so on. So that individual will assist researchers within that particular department in terms of the creating of RedCap projects, as well as managing the data and managing the process and the standard operating procedures for data management. So that tool. So once we have our initial setup meeting and we define these validation terms and data queries, then we would go and implement the project to design the project. And then the next step would be, for us to test the project and capture data and to see whether those validations are able to capture or to flag incorrect values and so on. All right. Now, in terms of a data management plan, these are the different elements, and I do acknowledge the source. You can go to this website to find more information around this tool. These are the different elements. What are the data collection? What are the data collection processes? What are the processes around documentation and metadata? What are the processes around storage and backup? What are the processes around the preservation of the data, the sharing and release of the data? Who is responsible for different elements of the data management? For example, I had an approach that, as a data manager, I have, you will see what I mean when I show you on RedCap. I have access to all elements of the project design, and I have access in terms of, adding or removing people. But the sole responsibility in terms of who determines who is added or who is not added is the principal investigator. But the principal investigator does not have privileges of manipulating the data within RedCap, because at the end of the day, the data manager is the one who is accountable if there's any loss of data. And therefore, responsibilities assist you, defining those responsibilities, assist you to define the privileges. You may have the data administrator or the data manager. You may have the principal investigator. You may have project coordinators and maybe students and so on who are involved in that particular project. And all of those individuals have got different privileges within the project. And also, what are the ethical and legal compliance issues that you need to consider for your data? All right. The elements of analysis script and also the practical elements of it as well, we're going to discuss tomorrow in webinar 3. So I'm not going to go into detail around those today. I did briefly show those last week. So my first encounter with a statistical analysis plan was with this project that I was involved in, which is the multi-center infant body composition reference study. And this was probably about 10 years ago, around 2014, 2015. And I was still a postgraduate student at the time. And the overall aim of this project was to assess longitudinal changes in body composition, and that is fat mass and fat-free mass of healthy infants and young children during the first 2 years of life. Apologies for this words that are cut out of the screen. And for this particular study, the sample size was, remember I mentioned the importance of calculating sample sizes and also considering effect size in terms of a calculation. Now, the sample size was calculated based on a deviation from a reference, all right? So there's a reference so we were trying to, one of the papers that has been generated from this work is a new references of fat mass and fat-free mass from a multi-population sample, all right? So we had children from different settings, low and middle income countries, including South Africa, Brazil, Australia, India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. So we had a variety, we had some variance in terms of the population that was sampled for this research to try and have a more representative reference of fat mass and fat-free mass, because currently other than for this one which we produced in in fact there is no standard. This is not even the one that we produced is not a standard, it is a reference. But there is no standard per se in terms of what an ideal fat mass, an ideal fat-free mass should be in infants between birth and 2 years of age. But what this was attempting was to say in a sample of children of a healthy sample population, of a sample from a healthy population, what is a median or mean fat mass and mean fat-free mass? All right, and so we obtained values from a previous study of what a mean fat mass for boys and a mean fat mass is for girls. And remember, we're trying to estimate a deviation of 1 standard deviation. So a single standard deviation is about 0.5 grams. And I'm sorry, I apologize for this. Let me just exit this sharing screening for now. Try and get all of this in one screen. All right, so, and then for fat mass, we had, 9.13 kilograms with the standard deviation for boys and about 8.99 kilograms for girls, and 1 standard deviation is about 1 kilogram. So at this point, I thought maybe I should just demonstrate the importance of I'm going to stop sharing for a second as I want to open a different program, because I just want to demonstrate this process of calculating sample size for your study. So I mentioned earlier, there are different equations for calculating sample size, and there are different tools that are available, and even web pages that are available for calculating sample size. For example, one of them, in fact, I can just type here some of the tools, some of the websites that are available so that you can be able to access them. Is dssresearch.com, and we also have RAWSoft for for more population studies, and you've got a categorical outcome that you're interested in. But I want to show you, you can also use statistical packages like Stata to calculate sample size. So let's see, just using the values that we have. I'm going to start sharing again. I just want to use an example of the data that I showed you just now, how one can go about to calculate sample size in Stata. And the values, let's say, for example, we're interested in a study to assess difference in fat mass between boys and girls at the age of, let's say, 2 years. And we find a study that has produced that shows us the average fat mass of boys and its standard deviation, and the average fat mass of girls and its standard deviation. And we want to replicate this study in our own setting. Let's say this was done in a different population, but we're interested in replicating this study in our own setting. So obviously part of the process of trying to calculate a sample size is going into literature and trying to find those values that speak to your variable of interest. And you may be interested, say, to establish whether there'll be a half a kilogram or there'll be a kilogram difference between girls and boys in terms of fatness. Or you're looking at maybe children, undernourished children, and children who are who have got a healthy diet, and you want to see what is the difference in fat mass, and you go into a study and you say you're going to estimate that there's going to be a difference of about a kilogram or whatever value that you estimate you feel is relevant. So in Stata, how Stata you can do that is you go to statistics and you go to power and sample. Here, as you can see that there are different methods or different approaches to calculating sample size depending on the variable of interest or depending on the analysis that you're interested in. You may be interested in regression slopes, you may be interested in proportions, or in the particular example that we're dealing with now, you're interested in finding an adequate sample size to detect a particular difference. All right. Now, let's say, for example, it can be a one sample, meaning you've got one sample and you've got a standard, such as was the case in this particular study. All right. So you've got a reference, and that reference gives you what the median value for fat mass is at a particular age. And you're interested to see whether the mean in your sample is going to differ from that standard, from that mean that already exists, from that standard. All right. In this particular case, you would use a one sample to test. But I'm going to demonstrate a two samples. So, for example, you're interested to compare, as I said earlier, fat mass between two groups. One is undergoing a particular intervention in terms of nutritional intervention, and the other group is not undergoing any nutritional intervention. All right, and you want to see whether there's a difference in terms of fat mass. So test comparing two independent means. So you've got two groups here, males or females, or you've got two groups. One is undergoes a particular intervention, and one is not undergoing an intervention. All right, here you will specify the different parameters at which you want to test this difference. All right, you might be interested in testing it at the 5% level of significance, and the power of this one. For this particular study, it was done at the power of 90%, and you're interested that is a one-to-one sample. So the two samples will be equal, and you'll have a mean for group one. Say, for example, the mean, as I said, showed earlier, was 3.1, and the mean in the other group was 3.05, and the standard deviations were 0.5, and the standard deviation in the second group was 0.446. All right. What sample size do we need to detect this difference? So this difference here is about is this half a kilogram, if I'm not mistaken, 0.05. No, it's not even half of a kilogram. All right. All right. So this is a very small small difference. Let's see how what a sample size calculation helps us to do. So if I click submit, in the output is going to show me the sample size that is required to, so the difference is 0.05. It's a very small sample size. And the sample size that is required for that is about 1,900 in each group. All right. So this tells you upfront, based on the effect size that you're trying to establish. All right. How big a sample size do you need in your study? You need to, for this particular difference, you need to recruit 1,942 in each group. All right. So if you fall below this, you'll be underpowered to detect that particular difference. But of course, this difference is very small, and sample size, the difference that you estimate is an important factor in terms of calculating your sample size. So let's look at a larger difference. So let's make this about a difference of about half. We'll go back to Stata, and we'll go back to this window here. All right, so one is 0.5, and this other one is 0.60. So that's a difference of about 0.5. All right, let's keep the standard deviations about the same, and let's see what the calculation. Now you can see it's way smaller. You only need about 21 in each group to detect a difference of a half a kilogram in fat mass between two independent groups. All right. So 42, a sample size of 42, or 21 in each group will have enough power to detect this difference at a power of 90% and a 5% level of significance. So that is really one of the processes for calculating sample size. I'll show you maybe, let me just stop sharing again and show you another example, maybe with a tool like RAWSoft. And I'm going to start sharing again. And this is what it looks like. The website, forgive me. This is the website here, rawsoft.com, sample size. So it's easy to access. All right. And here you need to specify parameters, the level of confidence, the margin of error, and the population size and what, let's say the prevalence that you want to detect in a particular population. All right. So let's say you want to detect a prevalence of 25%. What is required? You require a sample size of 200. You need to recruit about 285 respondents, to establish a prevalence of about 25% in for whatever particular condition that you may be interested in. So at the parameters of 95% confidence interval and 5% level of significance. If you're more stringent at 99% level of significance, you require a larger sample size. So I thought I'd just demonstrate there, a little bit about sample size calculation, which is an important element of a statistical analysis plan. All right, and there are those tools. I've included them in the presentation, which I will share with you. So ultimately, so the sample size calculation for this project meant that we need about 100 participants per site, and we had 3 sites for the birth to 6 months, and we had 4 sites for the 3 to 24 months, which meant that we needed 300 and 400. Ultimately, the sample size that we had was 468 for the birth to 6 months, and we had 925 no, 25 for the 3 to 24 months. So we had enough power in our study to detect the differences. All right, sorry, this is just a repetition. And this, I mean, between 2023 and we've just received now about, in fact, today, one of our papers, which was led by one of my colleagues that I mentioned in the first webinar, Will. The paper has just been made available now, today, all right? So it's been accepted for publication. And this is the eighth publication from this work between 2023 and today, and to date. And this, this production of papers was facilitated by this coordinated approach to data analysis of developing a statistical analysis plan. But in spite of that coordinated approach, there were still challenges because you're dealing with, I mean, I mentioned earlier some of the attitudinal issues that researchers may have towards data management plans, statistical plans, and so on, all right? Not everybody is as committed to the process, and so there will still be challenges. So we had challenges of incomplete definitions, and we had challenges of compliance from different centers in terms of defining variables, as well as, and that led to, as in South Africa, we were the data management center. So we were managing data for all the different centers. That led to additional work from me to try and harmonize that data, in spite of the fact that we had a harmonization exercise. I'm going to show you that example here. We had this harmonization exercise in Vienna in 2019. Okay, it's showing something else. This is not what I wanted to show. I think so. Okay, sorry. No, it's created the same link for the same project. Please just bear with me. I want to show you this document very quickly. I'm going to start sharing again. So this is a meeting that we had in Vienna in 2019. Obviously, I mean, we continue to improve on on some of these on some of these documents that we're producing. But this was, like I said, this was my first experience with this project, of a data analysis plan. And this was earlier before the project started. And it gives, as you can see here, it gives a bit of a background of the study, the rationale for the study, and the objectives of the study, all right, and the specific objectives. But I'm going to skip to further down to the data management process that we, or the data management approach that we had. All right. All right. So in the harmonization process, we defined how we're going to store the data on RedCap database for 0 to 6 months and 3 to 24 months. And all countries participants were added to RedCap, and the finalization of the harmonization variables. We specified as part of the harmonization process, we specified the length of variables to make them compatible with stats packages, and we provided the R code and the standard to files for doing this work. We specified how we're going to clean data, all right, how we're going to first record data, and also how we're going to clean the data, what processes we're going to undertake to clean the data. We had, for example, Z-scores, which are for height, weight, and other anthropometric variables, and we use cut-offs to identify outliers, and the different functions that we would use to identify different outliers. And we specified, how we're going to approach categorical variables as well, and how, the process of the submission of data and access as well. And I just want to skip to, show, yes, this is where I wanted to show. So in this, process, in this meeting, one of the most important elements was really to define the variables and where we're going to be, how we're going to be computing them, because this is ultimately going to lead to a computation. And for example, we are trying to establish exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months. All right, and the different questions that we need to include, or different variables that respond to these different consumptions, all right, and that we need to include in our computation, all right. And we did that for all variables, and this was way before we started with analysis. Like I said, we started the analysis. The first paper came out in 2023. We started the analysis around 2022. And part of that was also in a tabular format. I sent last week a table that shows, how you build up a statistical analysis plan. All right. So this is a table that will be included in the statistical analysis plan. And here you list all your variables and how those variables will be treated, all right? And are they continuous variables? And are they going to be categorized in any particular format? And if they're continuous, how are we going to summarize them? And in terms of my own statistical analysis plan, I have changed, it has developed from this. And I'm going to show you an example of that. Let me go back to my presentation. So here, for example, this is just this appendix I added to last week's presentation, and this tree helps you as a researcher, and we're going to discuss this in our webinar tomorrow. Obviously, how you summarize variables depends on the on the characteristics of the variable itself, all right? And so if it's a numerical variable, there are different ways in which, there are certain number of ways you can summarize your variable. And if it's a categorical variable, there are only a certain number of ways that you can summarize that particular variable. Believe it or not, there are individuals, for example, who have come across situations, and not too long ago, where individuals will summarize. So if you code, for example, gender as 1, 2, 3, and for, let's say, male, female, or male, female, and say non-binary, or whichever definition. So here, some individuals, obviously, that is based, there are codes attached to those labels. And, let's say it's a 1, 2, 3. Some individuals will actually generate a mean of that, and they say the average gender was 2 point something. And that is not meaningful. And so, categorical variables can only be summarized as proportions and means. And that is what a statistical analysis plan forces you to do. I said it forces you to think about your data, and part of it is that you will include the title, a brief background, and what are the research objectives that you're trying to test in this particular analysis, and also your analytical objectives, okay? And these are linked to the tables and figures that you're going to be presenting, all right? So for example, to describe the demographic and clinical characteristics, and here I've got the different variables, I've got the different categorical variable, demographic variables, and I've got the different clinical variables that I'm interested in here. And like I said earlier, so I have changed my my statistical analysis plan from the one that I showed you earlier, which only had 3 columns. Now I've got 5 columns because I'm specifying also, okay, how am I going to treat this variable? Age, I'm going to treat it in a continuous manner. Race, I'm going to treat it in a categorical manner. Employment in a categorical manner. And this is how I'm going to describe it. I'm going to describe it with a mean and a standard deviation. I'm going to describe it with a frequency and percentage and so on. So these are your descriptive statistics, and these are your inferential statistics. All right. So if I'm interested, for example, in assessing whether there are differences in age between, let's say, I've got employed and unemployed, I will use a t-test. Is there an association between a race and employment status? I will use a chi-squared test and so on. All right. And the second objective, for example, is there an association between injury and, say, your gender, all right? So, and, are males more likely to get injured compared to females? And the type of test that you would use for that is a chi-square test. So this is, this is the exercise that you engage in developing your statistical analysis plan. You will list all the variables that are going to be included in your analysis. And when you do this prior, like I said, it affords you the opportunity to think about the variables that you want to collect, so that you do not collect variables that will not be helpful in terms of the research question that you're trying to answer. I want to move quite quickly so that I can also just show you a demonstration, just show you briefly what are some of the things that I spoke about in terms of RedCap. All right. So in terms of the data management tool, these are as I said, the different elements, and I'm not going to go into much detail on this. But there are some general guidelines that you can follow in building up your data management tool, and there are also institutional data management plans, rather. Sorry, not but data management tools. There are also institutional data management plans. All right, so you can follow your institutional data management plans, but it's important that we have those, and we try and as much as possible to comply with them. All right. So there's just data collection and how the data will be collected. Like I said earlier, in our in the unit where I worked, we were using an electronic data collection, and we're collecting all data directly onto RedCap. That has got its advantages and disadvantages. If you collect the data and you move away, and you're in a let's say you're in a population, if you make a mistake, unless you're able to call that individual back, then you have no way of correcting. But like I said, the advantage with tools like RedCap is that you can implement some validations to ensure that individuals who are capturing have got a warning system when they capture outside of the boundaries of what is expected for that particular variable. All right, how are we going to describe describe what information will be needed for others to understand your data, the metadata as well. There are also standards for metadata. We're not discussing those. All right. So it's important to describe. I mean, when you're looking at your variables, there's a story behind each variable, and that metadata is important to allow us to understand. When with for example, one of the things that the RedCap allows you to do, it captures timestamps, for example, which are part of the metadata, and who made changes to that particular variable, and what was the original value that was captured in that. Okay, so and so those are different types of records that you can keep. Storage and backup. This is extremely important. I mean, we've had experiences. So some organizations or some research units, for example, even though we're capturing data on RedCap, but there are also other instruments on which we capture data, or rather where data is collected and data are stored. So, for example, in a situation like a temperature review, there's a machine called the dual X-ray absorptiometry, which measures bone mass in terms of bone mineral content, bone mineral density, as well as body fat and so on. All right, that instrument collects and keeps the data. And stores the data within its own drive. All right, but there are other instruments like that, like your quantitative computed tomography, which we used at DPHRU, and others like your PPOD that we used for the study that I mentioned earlier. So all of those instruments, all of those tools, or all of those research tools, they got their own storage, but you need to develop a backup system. So whether you're doing it bi-weekly or weekly, to make sure that even if the system that is linked to that particular machine that you're using, even if that gets corrupted, you've got a backup of that data in RedCap, all right, which will not be corrupted. And something that I forgot to mention, at least I know at West University, that the administrators of RedCap, even apart from your own backup as a researcher, they also do backups, so that even if you would delete the project by mistake, they're able to reload the project for you, because they constantly back up. There's a constant, very regular backup of projects that are within RedCap. And so there's both, like I said, a system, rather an institutional support, but also having your own standard operating procedures within your department is also very helpful, so that you are able to ensure the integrity of your data. So having standard operating procedures around the schedule of backup, for example, is very important. Also, how long the data will be preserved is important. Sharing and reuse considerations are important. And also who's the responsibilities, as I mentioned, identifying roles of stewardship is very important. And that is something that is possible in RedCap, as I'm going to show you very shortly before we end. So let me just try, I'm going to stop sharing for a second, and I'm going to just show you briefly what it looks like on RedCap. So this is just a code book for this project, which is on RedCap. And if I take you to a homepage of RedCap, you may not be familiar with RedCap, but let's see. Let me just take you to my projects. So this is where you'd go if you had any projects on RedCap. This is where it would, this would show you what it show you. It would show you the number of projects that you have. But I'm going to show this example here. of of importance of recording. So here in this code book, on RedCap, I will probably give a more detailed uh, lecture on RedCap. But I just want to, this is just a demonstration of the importance of recording. So what I did with this particular project, I specified how age should, rather how date should be captured in different formats. So here I've got a day, month, year format in this variable called visit date. And in this variable called date of birth, I've got a year, month, day format. All right. So here, if I go, for example, to add a record, let me add a new record. All right. So here, if I add it, so you can see it tells you the format in which this variable is day, month, year. And I've created a variable here on RedCap on which I can calculate age. All right. And it's simply, this is a syntax for calculating age on RedCap, but I'm not going to go into those details now. All right. And this is just for demonstration. Let's say the data is being captured today. I can navigate to date using either the calendar or this today button. So I'm doing the data collection today. So I'm simply gonna click today, and the date of birth is not today. So obviously I need to navigate through the calendar to find the date. Let's say this individual was born in year 2000 and was born in July and was born on the 13th of July. All right. Now it gives me an error, a syntactical error. All right, because the values that I want to use for my calculation do not match. One is year 2000 on the July 13th, and the format is year, month, day, and the date of visit, which is today, is the 6th of the 11th, 2024. And both, whether you do the calculation in RedCap or outside of RedCap in R or in Stata, this may be a challenge. Certainly, it is a challenge for RedCap. So I was just trying to emphasize the importance of specifying. I mentioned earlier that you need to specify how records will be in your code book, how data will be recorded. Now, lastly, I just want to show you that I mentioned the issue of privileges that one can be allowed in RedCap. All right. This is my project, so I'm already edited there with default privileges. So I'm going to edit privileges here. So in the different privileges, and also you can specify when those privileges are going to expire. I've got access to designing the project, to adding individuals, both in terms of specifying the user rights as well as adding data access groups. I can format other privileges in terms of the reports, in terms of the calendar for the project. I can create records, I can rename records, I can delete records, and this is this is important because you don't want, for example, someone to simply delete a record because for whatever reason. So in my part of my SOP, and this is something that I entered, this is an agreement that I entered into with the PIs, is that I would not, for example, give them a privilege of deleting records or renaming records or creating records for that matter. If they're the PI, they've got individuals below them who can do those, create those records. Also, I would not give the PI the project design and setup privileges so that they don't make changes to the project. Even with the individuals below them, say for example, the project coordinator, I'd only give them privileges for creating records. So they can only add a record, but they cannot rename a record. So if they need to rename the ID, for example, for that particular record from 10052 to 10053. I'll be the only one who can rename that particular record. Or if it was a practice record and I want to remove it from my database, then I can delete it from I can provide myself with that privilege on RedCap. All right, I can lock records if I specify that also, and also in terms of viewing rights, I've got complete viewing rights. Other individuals can only have read-only rights. They can only see, but they cannot edit when they in terms of the report. So they may be able to generate the report, but they can only see the report and they may not be able to edit it. And also in terms of data exporting, are they able to export the full data set? Or can they export a de-identified data set? And this is part of the SOPs that you build in your institution. And so that is where I'm going to, like I said, this is not a presentation on RedCap, so I did not cover from basics in terms of how to create project and so on. And if individuals have got a need for that, we can discuss that.